By the beginning of February, I had already consigned that I was going to end up quitting this game, but I was going to wait for Zenda to come out and try her out in Immortal War and Ranked, and see if the new character would give me any kind of edge. She appeared to be a ranged-centric character. I reasoned that her ult might give me an advantage where the other characters that required more precision and more timing and more ability to chase had failed me. But it really didn't help that much. The unfortunate reality was that the extreme mounting frustration of this game was helping me forget the pain and stress of real life. It is perhaps one of the most unhealthy relationships I have ever been in with a game, but I had to accept it for what it is. It was the choice between being semi-functional or not functional at all. Survival mechanisms kick in, and you place your dick inside the bench press. It's time to pump, you tell yourself, but no JO crystal is powerful enough to withstand this. It's difficult to believe, looking at these recordings, that at any point in my life, I was actually somewhat competent at playing the video game. Not only playing, but competitively successful as well, and in a variety of products. Sure, I never pursued professional playing. That never really interested me. But wherever I went, I eventually found success, and in many cases dominated my peers, both in terms of the local modding communities and in terms of the internet at large. So Naraka, even though I knew it would be very difficult to get into, proved to be quite eye-opening in that, well, my days as a gamer are indeed behind me, and inescapably so. Foolish of a hope it may have been, I leveraged my final bets on this game on the new hero that came out within early February, Zenda Wu. Because of her ranged ultimate and ranged abilities, well, I hoped that would help me bridge the gap between ultimates I felt like I wasn't very good with, like the duration-based ones, such as Syra or Zai, and something more active that I can mix into things like Tessa's. But it is a foolish hope, and it ultimately wouldn't change that much. This would likely be the last time I would stream Naraka for a very, very long time. Amusingly, the audio is totally fucking desynced, so I can't really use it. Simply changing which hero I'm playing is not something I ever expect to make much of a difference, and I really didn't expect that to be the case here. What I was really hoping for was that all those innumerable instances, literally everyone in the game iframes my ultimate, can be something I can turn into me actually gaining some kind of an advantage for a change. Or perhaps I could interact with players in a way that the ultimate just didn't allow me to do. Nonetheless, I was not expecting too much. I hadn't played this hero, I just started up the stream and begun playing. I was going to be going up against a multitude of other players doing exactly that. Most of them are going to be quite high level. I ran into multiple Azuras during this, and I had also just woken up, so what little skills I had weren't going to be employed very well. During the test trial, a number of people had figured out some extremely convoluted TODs for this character, but pretty much nobody would really be able to combo her ultimate for a while after release because of the nerfs they did to her. However, people with a low enough ping and a high enough FPS can combo off of her damage-based arrow during her ultimate. I can't. Not even in training, it's not possible. Shortly after Zenda's release, I dumped a video onto YouTube that was a multi-hour quick match marathon. It contained multiple matches with actual players. That was taking place after this stream was run on her launch day, or at least right after she came out, because I run D&D on Wednesday, so a few hours had passed. But this is much more interesting than the vast majority of my productions, because just like in the Lanny release, there's actual human players in Quick Match. And while I do often run into Azuras, especially earlier in the year, within a lot of these I tend to run into players that are more or less around my skill level. This allows me to at least do some things I may not normally try to do, experiment with different things, of course a new character, but also things like trying to use the cannon. And I really wasn't impressed with any of it. In fact, it was really actually quite embarrassing. This is when I would discover things like her F1 does no damage, and this character was running for me for fucking ever, and it was just painful. Many high-level players would reminisce to me that back in the day, Quick Match actually had people playing it. There was actually individuals who played this video game who were not all gods, and not just beginner console players. And you could actually encounter relatively balanced matches. And indeed, when I had first started, the Quick Match trios actually did have a couple of teams playing it. But solos had always been completely dead, and Zenda did not see nearly the player count that Lanny did. When I go through these matches, win or lose, they don't usually feel that one-sided. Some of the console players I end up killing don't really seem like they know what they're doing, but most of the players I ran into were at least a threat to me. And at the end of the day, I ask myself, where the fuck are these people normally? They're not in Quick Match, they're not in Ranked, they're most certainly not in Immortal War. They just don't seem to actually play the game. I haven't seen any of these players anywhere at any given point in time. Since they had just deleted Spiritwell, I had begun to think that these were all Spiritwell refugees. Players who just ignore a solo queue, perhaps because they also don't have good ping or FPS, I'm not really sure. I know there is a lot of very good players that play only Spiritwell. I considered it to be one of the sweatiest game modes in the entire game. But I wasn't running into those hyper sweats. I was running into people that more or less reminded me of myself. Not really incompetent in game knowledge, just not good either. Unfortunately, like I said, the player count wasn't even a fraction of that Lanny's release had. I'd say there was maybe 1/10 of the players. Almost all of my lobbies were bot only. Almost all of them had some kind of ping problem, but it certainly was a far cry from the shenanigans I was having to deal with an Immortal War. That really does lead me to believe that there is some other kind of odd interaction going on. After all, if Immortal has the lowest ping, but does the least strange shit in comparison to some of the other people, like that Prince Charming fellow, I've really got to wonder, is it just ping? Or does FPS cause even more issues? But Immortal has very high FPS. It's an odd interaction. And indeed, we can tell that a lot of these players have very, very high FPS and low ping. So, what is it that is causing it to have odd interactions? Why do I, for example, lose so many initiatives, so many trades? Why do I fail to gain priority in the vast majority of clashes? For example, there's just a lot of odd things. One of the things I learned early into my time with Zenda, particularly early in this match, is terrain is an absolute nightmare to deal with. And I'm going to end up losing this fight in part because my early initiative was confounded so much in part by the bots and then in part by the terrain. But it will still ultimately be ping that seals the deal. The Halberds, of course, parry-rob me, and he has his ult back already, perhaps having grabbed the Firefly, so I'm going to take a lot of damage initially before being able to return some. Eventually, it's going to come to a ping interaction where his F2 activates whilst being attacked. Also, it's blue, which makes you think you can interrupt it, just like Shale's shields, but you can't. Consistency, once again, not exactly this game's strength. Also, how did his spear not hit me? I don't fucking know, dude. The days ticked on by. All of the players that had appeared with Zenda's launch and quick match hastily vanished, and I was faced with the reality that I was gonna have to bring her into ranked if I really wanted to try to make this work. And so, eventually Immortal War and everything like that would call to me once again to suffer immensely. And suffer I would. Long gone would be the days of bullying console players and being able to actually play the game. I went back to the grind, and it would be my final attempt. So laggy. I parried. Laggy! This one's also looted. Oh, back to Q, I guess. Champion fight is one of the worst decisions they could have ever made with this game, for a variety of reasons. Not the least of which, because you are almost never going to be in a lobby, much less actually encounter individuals who are around your skill level, unless you are already a top player. This is because not only do those players get mixed in with those high-end players, even if they're only in gold, it doesn't matter, you'll still get thrust in a champion fight with Formless Dragons. Those players are going to be divvied up in a very, very small map, which means you don't really get to have the interaction of sometimes running into somebody who's lower level or around your level before running into somebody who's higher level. You're almost always going to be immediately third-partied or otherwise hot-dropped somebody who is high level, especially since there's only ever a handful of loot areas. And in your first revive, well, those areas are already going to be looted, so you're doubly fucked. Of course, this is in the context of a hypothetical situation that low-level players actually play this game other than me. Because in a normal Maelstrom lobby, provided the other players actually use the Nexus and don't just farm each other like they usually do, I will always be instantly and effortlessly murdered by every single player in the lobby. Not just the handful of Formless Dragons. They're all Formless Dragons, as far as I'm concerned. Immortal War is not a solution to this, because Immortal War is snowball hell. Whoever gets kills gets the money, and the bulk of the equipment in the game comes from money. Those high-end players, if they do happen to get a couple kills early on, are just going to be absolutely unstoppable, even if you don't run into them. Zorayan proposed to me perhaps you might have a scaling mechanism where purple loot doesn't drop until after Shadow 3 and yellow loot doesn't drop until after Shadow 4 or something of that nature. I think this would be an acceptable middle ground between the two, but at the end of the day, I didn't start playing Naraka because it's a small hero arena. I was playing it because it had a large number of players and you could have large fights in it. Champion fight by design goes against this. Immortal War was already a very small small scale, then they reduced the player count from 16 to 12, making it even worse. Naraka is no longer a battle royale. It has almost nothing to do with that genre anymore. It is simply a hero arena, just like Dota. And if we're going to start treating Naraka's fights like you would in a fighting game, I think Naraka needs netcode that is competitive with that of a fighting game. Because as it is simply unfucking playable, just because I live a few states away from the server. I'm also of the firm belief you shouldn't just be able to spam air horizontal attacks and get 5 to 6 fucking attacks through on the fist blades. This kind of shit is just unnecessarily stupid. A little while ago, Hypernova suggested doing the hot drop and then ratting for the second life, and then trying to just third party or whatever after that. When I did my Zenda run in Immortal War and Ranked, I played by this style again. I would just hot drop the first, get my kill or die, usually die, and then I would revive elsewhere and try to get loot, and usually try to take Yang. It didn't improve anything, it didn't change anything. Also, I have really, really bad eyesight, apparently. At times, I would still run it down. If the player didn't have super high gear, why not? I mean, you're gonna have to fight them eventually. You may as well fight them while at least it's somewhat even. The experience was more valuable to me than the handful of points I would get and inevitably lose afterwards, such as, for example, in this case. These nameless, faceless, Chinese text American players, I didn't even know who any of them were. It didn't matter to me. It was just another person that I could fight. I didn't really pay attention that much to third parties. It didn't matter if I was attacked or third party. I didn't get mad about that. That's actually one of the things I cared the least about. It's part of the game, after all. All I really focused on was just try to learn how people act, how they react, what works, what doesn't work, what works reliably, and try to navigate the maze, the labyrinth, to figure out how to play this game. And so I poured hour after hour after hour, all the time, into this game. I would sign on just to do Immortal War. I would come into Ranked, and every now and then I would do quick matches to try to polish up other things or work on cultivation. All of this in the midst of the insanity of real life and my intense D&D work. I really did want to get this game figured out. I really wanted to be able to play it. I really wanted to be able to enjoy it. But I knew eventually I would come to hate it even more. And that's precisely what happened. Every single time there was a temptation that I might have a decent encounter or a decent fight, I would get parry-robbed, or some odd interaction of FPS or ping dependency would cost me something, or I just wouldn't be able to understand I needed to do something that I should understand how to do because I had been taught it previously, or had done it previously. The inconsistencies mixed with the unreliability of the inputs, the controls, and everything related compounded each other viciously. Playing Zenda didn't give me any options that I didn't have playing Tessa. They function extremely similarly to one another in terms of how I play them. And perhaps that is where the root of the issue lays, and why there is so little distinction between characters for me. In most matchups, the player character ultimately determines quite a lot. I mean, my win rate against Tarka is probably in individual percentages at best. But somehow, when it's my end facing outwards, it doesn't change that much at all. Again, most of my success seems to come down to the fact that enemies lose to me. I don't beat them. People make mistakes, and then they die for it. While it is true you could look at it from the inverse and that I make mistakes and that's why I die more often, It doesn't result in me cleaning up my play and therefore defeating opponents after the fact. That doesn't happen at all. I just perform exactly the way I have within the very first month of playing this game. Nothing has really changed in that regard. People are slipping up, and they died back then too, for the same reasons. Nothing really changes. It's just the amount of victories I get decrease over time. One of the things I definitely did like about Zenda is you weren't nerfed by the buff of Tessa's F. The buff that Tessa's F gives you is an invitation for an enemy to get a free combo on you, as you have seen countless times. It is an intentional nerf to her. It makes her unviable within solo play. Zenda doesn't have that, and while the bird on her F may not be that useful either, it doesn't immediately put you at a disadvantage when you use it in most cases, like Tessa's does. Arguably, the ult is also more powerful, but it doesn't seem to do that much damage, and most enemies know how to iframe it. I've tried both V1 and V2, and I haven't been particularly impressed with either, given V2 is easily iframed and the damage of V1 is really bad. But it still gives you mobility, if you can avoid being trolled by terrain, that is, and that's something Tessa does not have. Ultimately, both characters still heavily rely on you being good at neutrals to make use of either of their ultimates, so both of them are going to perform exactly the same way for me, despite their differences. Whereas I have historically done well in Tessa mirror matches because they're so simple, Zenda, indeed having some degree of granularity to the usage of her abilities and how you mix them with your combos, means that I'm always going to be at an inherent disadvantage compared to every other player. I can't win mirrors with her, unless the player is extremely inexperienced. This game was in all likelihood by far and beyond my most successful Immortal War game I had ever played, and the closest I would ever get to winning an Immortal War game. Unlike the vast majority of players who win at least some fair percentage of their games, even at a low skill level, I have yet to ever win. And I never will. I won a single ranked solos in this season, which is just keeping consistent with my existing win rates. It's par of the course, but Immortal War is entirely unwinnable. I don't really think of it as winning or losing, but it's still sobering to see. Ayo J618 King Z P Xeno Sin N P. That's crazy. Of course, it's endless tears. I killed too many people last game, so now he's arrived to farm me at long last.
どちらが早い。追求は魂の指。矢は混沌を開く。
暗闇は満ちた。
あなたごときがこの私を止められる。
Okay. In at least half of my fights, I get parry robbed. During this fight with Dio, it looks fairly even, all the way up until he decides to use the horizontal hang sword, one of the slowest blues in the game, which parry robs me. You can even hear it. And in that gang fight before, you can hear it, see the red flash and all. And I still get hit. The game consistently gives me feedback that, hey, you pushed parry at the right time. And then I get hit anyways. There is a clear disconnect between what would normally be you hit parry too late because of ping, so it didn't register, and you hit parry at the right time, so it registers. I'm getting the feedback that it's registering, but it's not. The entire system is fucked. And 60, 70, 80 MS alone shouldn't be responsible for a lot of this. When StarCraft 2 first came out, there was a big to-do about Blizzard's forced latency, because rather than encourage people to switch off of 56K in the age of 2010, Blizzard decided it was better to force everybody onto something like 125, 150 MS, which may even be there to present day, I don't know, but on launch it was quite serious. And what this did is it made every single input have a delay on it. It was most noticeable when trying to micro units, and as a micro-intensive user, trying to dance Vikings and Hellions and other things like that was clunky enough with the animation speeds that StarCraft 2 had, but when you threw the latency on top of it, it made things a little bit of a clusterfuck. What it did not do was make the resolutions of actions take that much longer. You didn't notice a huge disconnect between things doing damage, ability resolutions, and things like that. When it comes to Naraka having far tighter frame timings for extremely important game events like parrying and dodging and so forth, you wouldn't think that 60, 70, 80 MS would be such an issue. And it isn't, really. But it's how Naraka is dealing with it on the netcode side that makes it an issue. HKS lives about 30 minutes away from me. His Naraka ping looks a lot like mine, although he's not behind an apartment connection. Nonetheless, if we do customs together, it is actually impossible to parry his 1-2-3s, especially from the fist blades. The third cannot be parried unless it is buffered. It's just like fighting Mucky, who's on 50 MS and living in the States. I cannot parry a large chunk of his blue attack follow-ups. It's just not possible unless it's already buffered. Good input buffering allows you to do this, but when a lot of decisions have to be made within a split second, the way in which the netcode handles these decisions is extremely important. Unfortunately, one of the core things I did not work with as a game developer so far was networking. So while I can't pinpoint precisely where Naraka's problem points are with networking, I can tell you there are problems. And this is because Hypernova went out of his way to demonstrate to me some extremely irregular behavior with this game. If I knew which stream it was, I would rip it, but there's a good chance he's already released his findings in some public channel anyways, as he was showing me that he was preparing a document to do so. Naraka behaves extremely weirdly with the ping indicator in the top right. If you intentionally fix your frame rate at very low levels like 30, and then adjust your maximum FPS by 1 above or below in increments, the ping indicator goes fucking insane, sometimes elevating or lowering your ping upwards of 10 or 20 at a time. This, at the very least, tells you that the ping indicator you see in the game is complete bullshit. but it shouldn't be tied to the game thread whatsoever, even for display purposes. So what precisely is going on here? It's hard to say for certain, but I went out of my way to figure out all the IPs that Naraka was connecting to when I entered a game, and I pinged each and every single one of them through Windows. All of them reported an average of around 65 ms, the exact same ping that the login server tells me it has. But that ping is far lower than anything the game tells me. If I had an X3D processor, would the game tell me I had a ping as low as 50? Would that be real? It's hard to know for sure without having access to the game's source. But it's debatable if 24 Entertainment even has access to the source code to Unity to begin with. They're a mobile phone developer. They dealt only with transactional netcode prior to Naraka. And it's arguable if Naraka's netcode is anything more advanced than a transactional phone game to begin with. It certainly doesn't feel like it, and the performance and competency behind its programming elsewhere leads one to second guess the reliability of something as sophisticated as fighting game netcode in the hands of this developer. Humorously, if Naraka's login server and the pings aren't lying, and the in-game indicator is incorrect, and I actually have something around the line of 65 ms, this is some of the lowest ping I've ever had to an American game. It's actually some of the lowest ping I've ever had in a game, period. It's on par with what I played with in League of Legends for some years prior to them moving their servers. And yet, somehow, Naraka performs just as unreliably as it did before I upgraded my processor, where prior on my 2700X, I had 110 ms average. The game feels no different, but the ping indicator sure looks a lot different. And indeed, I had an Australian player host some third-person shooter games for us recently, and our connection to her was 250 ms. You wouldn't really have known it. Not until it came to very specific channeled interactions. Beyond that, it was largely unnoticeable. 250 ms across the planet. Meanwhile, I can play Blaze Blue with a Frenchman all the way across the country, and you wouldn't really know that either. Of course, all the problems with Naraka circle back to the fact the developer developed this exclusively for a fixed frame rate and a fixed ping at LAN levels. That's what they play with in China. They don't care or even think about the performance of the game in conditions beyond this. Although one looks at Chinese gameplay in the NBPL and wonders if things like infinite grapple bounces really should be possible or not. They do seem to detract from the game both at a low level and a high level of play. When developing a game like this, you always take into account network performance, especially if you want it to be successful beyond an extremely closed space. For example, outside of China's multiple servers, all with LAN speeds. But the developer didn't really think about that. They didn't design the game with that in mind, which means that now that we're in this situation, we have inadvertently been thrust into the realm of unintended behavior. Make no mistake, almost everything we see within my videos and every other US video is unintended behavior. And in Europe, things get even more fucked apparently, because Europe's server is alleged to have a better tick rate than the American server, which means that some American connections to the European server actually perform better than they do in the NA server because the tick rate makes up for the 30, 40, 50 ms difference. I can't test this because I'm not one of the few people who gets sub 150 ms when connecting to EU. This is also just one of the reasons why I'm a firm believer that there should be no such thing as cross-region matchmaking, because these players bringing 100 plus MS is normally going to be where you're going to be seeing lots of performance problems with the servers. Naraka just has those performance problems regardless. That's not something you should be okaying this stuff by. That's not a metric you should be measuring it by. This is something you should only be seeing when you have somebody from EU or C connecting to you, and certainly not something between North Americans and Americans. Yeah, there's not a chance.
Tokens expire in much longer time.
Very bad at game died to the corruption. That's so sad. Nope. Oh, she's got pneumonia. She has pneumonia. One of the core rules of life is that bad news always gets worse. The outcome will always be the worst possible result. My grandmother wasn't home for any more than 3 days before she had to go back to the hospital, as she had brought pneumonia with her from the rehab center. And now, as I was trying my last effort to figure out how to play this game, in the backdrop, even more madness and misfortune was befalling my world. It suffices to say that I was not playing to my strengths, even at the absolute best of times. It's not like I was in a mental state to do so, but I make no excuses. This is what I am, and it's not like life is going to get any better. If I can't improve from here on, there is no point in continuing. I resign myself to this knowledge and force myself to continue queuing. I began to see Zenda as kind of like a Syra that I could navigate the map a little bit easier with. Syra kind of suffered from the same problems I had with Zai. I would activate my ult, and people would just walk away from me. And with Syra, it was even harder to chase them than it was with Zai, which was already difficult with the locomotion in this game being such a joke. But Syra keeps getting nerfed on top of it, and she's quite terrain dependent. Well, Zenda is also terrain dependent, but you have a little bit more ability to you than the other two characters. You can also abuse the gold focus quite a bit to deal with some bullshit in the same way that Lanny can. Although, again, this is tied with a mobility that in some cases puts you in a disadvantageous location. But it does seem to be quite useful for dealing with various Yang matches. Overall, I was content with playing her. I didn't know if I was gonna make her my new main or not, but she was alright, and I felt just as comfortable playing her as I did Tessa. But I didn't really see better results statistically, even though I had a few decent fights. I did not really use F2 that much. I tried it out a little bit, but seeing as I'm so bad at neutrals and every person in this game knows how to TOD me, I felt like I had to use F1, even though F2 is where a very large chunk of Zenda's TOD potential comes from, and even mundane combos and setups benefit enormously from it. It also does damage on its own if you need that, unlike F1 that does no damage. But again, I really needed the survivability, and I didn't feel like I was mechanically able to take advantage of F2 to begin with. Just about every other Zenda I ran into was also using F1, and sometimes I ran into F2 users, most notably being Hypernova, but in that case I didn't really feel like the character offered them anything they couldn't have gotten out of any other character. Something I probably could have done was change my glyphs. I was actually using luck glyphs on this hero, and it wasn't really that useful in Immortal War. But I didn't bother changing it because I honestly don't think it makes a damn of a difference what glyphs I use. I also saw I'm near X a couple times in these games. I'm pretty sure he had quit or taken a break because I hadn't seen him for quite a long time. Well, he didn't rust one bit, and every single fight I encountered him in was an incredibly one-sided loss. I stood absolutely no chance against him whatsoever, just like every other time I fought him in Battle Royale. It was pretty hopeless, and it just goes to show that, well, perhaps he didn't play for a while. It just didn't matter. We're also gonna see what looks like him interrupting my F ability or something. So you can interrupt that, but not F2, according to these recordings so far. Kinda weird. Looking back at the recordings and thinking independently of the FPS and the ping, I don't see anything that really stands out to me. Yes, I could pick together any given fight and say, oh, I could have done this, I could have done that, this is the appropriate response here, X, Y, Z. I don't know to make those decisions during the actual fights, and when you're making these reflections in hindsight, it's so much easier to say, oh, well, this is the right decision to do here, and this and that. I mean, there's a lot of things you can't do, like when Yodo activates her ult and starts crouch canceling and spamming horizontals, and you're just stuck in it, like you can't do anything at that point. You may as well just alt F4. The game's pretty much over at that point. So there's only so much you gain by reflecting and thinking about past fights you've had or whatever. There's only so much you can do. You can make certain technical observations and say, well, maybe you could do X, Y, Z. Well, the fire effect doesn't interrupt anything that Yodo does, so going back into it was not a wise decision, but she just would have caught up to me anyways. It doesn't really matter, right? But I even have funny interactions like this. I ran into a zipping in this game, and this zipping will be the very first person to send me a salty DM after the game. The zipping, I didn't take a screenshot of it, but the zipping said something like, I hope you get stuck in gold the next season. Obviously, this zipping was a new player. I don't think he had even 150 days on his account, but I don't know. Does he think like gold doesn't put you in matches with Azuras or something? Either way, apparently the only thing he really knew how to do was hold check the whip sword vertical, and that was about it. Once I figured that out and kind of just played more aggressive, it was a pretty easy fight overall. That said, it is still zipping and he sustains forever, so I had to be a little careful. And here we can see that Zenda's ult kind of struggles in this terrain. I can't really be super hard aggressive in here. And if the zipping had paid mind to that and stayed inside the buildings instead of going back out into the open, he might have been able to delay his death a little bit longer. But he didn't, so that was that. What could I have done to make this fight even easier? Well, I could have avoided trying to parry and used the dodge instead. But I find trying to dodge through the whipsword vertical is actually a real shit show. Sometimes you just get sucked back into it anyways. Many times trying to parry beside or behind it does not give me a parry like it does other weapons. Maybe you need to jump parry it, I'm not sure, but that's still not something I have in my muscle memory. Against the Akos, this was definitely going to be a much more difficult opponent. He does a lot of damage early on, and although I'm able to do a little bit with the ult, I'm not able to finish him off. And since I'm bad with the pistol, I'm not going to be able to finish him with that either. I didn't really want him to reset because I didn't think I could beat him in neutrals. I actually stood a chance of killing him there, but I fucked up the vertical combo. That was my chance to end the fight. I wasn't able to parry that. Again, I get in a few pistol hits here, but there's no damage that comes out of it. And eventually he just kills me. Part and parcel. The Justina fight I have after the fact is substantially worse because she is somehow able to avoid the horizontal and does not go for the parry on the vertical, so me trying to avoid that didn't matter. And then her parry just does an insane amount of, yeah, pretty one-sided.
私たちの縁もこれで切れたわね。
Welcome to the wonders of ping on an Xbox.
私教えない。私の足元にひれ伏しなさい。私たちの縁もこれで切れたわね。
Exponer punished.
暗闇は満ちた。
This guy's beating the shit out of me.
すべてが破壊されるのをとくと見よ。
What the fuck? That was silly. Alright.
私の足元にひれ伏しなさい。こっちょ、武器を落としちゃうなんて。
正白。筒から観光を放とう。
Man, I almost killed Dio despite the tremendous gear disadvantage. If I hadn't have fucked up that one attack, I probably would have killed him. But I did too much damage. Okay.
今の好機だな。
いいですか。あなたにロックしたわ。
How do you already have your own back? This is so stupid. We near the end of my remaining recordings of Naraka, and in all likelihood the end, at least of my discussion videos, for quite a long time, if not for good. I don't have too much else to discuss in regards to this game, either from a development perspective or from a learning perspective. Again, I feel like I've learned all I can in this game. I feel like I have long reached my plateau as a player, and there is nothing else for me to improve upon. Anything else beyond this point is going to require a substantial performance improvement on the game's behalf, and a completely different mindset as a player that I am just not capable of adopting. This is the limit that I can do with 1,500 hours in this project. It's quite pathetic, really. But that is my limit, and recognizing your limit is extremely important. Better late than never, right? It's important to know when it is time to stop and move on to something different. Just because you spent time in something, just because you invested a chunk of your life into something, doesn't mean you owe it to anything, and certainly doesn't mean that it owes you anything. At some point you have to realize that your time in this is not healthy for you, that the frustration that you are feeling is a detriment to your health and the momentum of your day-to-day as a body. It's not just because everything else in my life is a fucking disaster, it's because I have better things I could be doing, like trying to sleep, or perhaps trying to catch up on reading American news. There's just any number of things that could be more productive than playing solos in this game. It's just completely pointless. I recognized this some months ago, and I took a several months long hiatus. And I came back because, again, I needed something to distract myself, but it's like going back to an old lover because you're lonely. Things didn't work out in the past because it was unhealthy and destructive, and you knew this. You came into this to try to bury something under something else, but that doesn't leave you with a sum that is positive. There is nothing positive to gain from me playing solos in this product. There's nothing to gain from me continuing to do this. Were I to find dedicated coaching that actually understood the problems I have in spite of the performance issues and was able to make serious progress in my play quality, then perhaps it would be worth returning. But I do not believe that this kind of talent exists within the Naraka player base, at least not within global. I'm sure within China there is a number of highly skilled coaches out there, some of which who are probably even willing to work for free for their various Chinese-speaking brethren, but that is not a resource that I have access to, so it's not really worth considering. One of the things I do come out of Naraka with is a greater understanding of what makes good game mechanics and what makes poor game mechanics. Coming from Brood War, we have a lot of problems with people complaining about certain mechanics not really contributing to the game. Mostly people who are bad at Brood War. I am a person who is bad at Brood War, but I have been watching the professional scene for a great many years back when I was still developing content for it. There has always been some kind of conflict between things like, what about multi-building select? What about the selection limit? Do these actually contribute to the skill expression of the game? They don't. They never have. And that has been something I have considered for a very long time. That certain limitations of what you can do and how you can interact with things doesn't really make it more skill testing. It is how the game was built, But just because you can change certain things, like for example removing supply limits and stuff like that, doesn't necessarily mean you're removing anything from the game, so long as you're bringing in something that is skill testing elsewhere, like greater macro demand. For example, this was particularly at point when Warcraft 3 and then StarCraft 2 came out, both games that were objectively easier than Brood War in basically every respect, with much lower skill ceilings and much less manners in which to express skill. As a result, both of those products had very undeveloped professional scenes, with the latter having so much money injected into it from Blizzard merely for meme's sake rather than any actual belief that it had value as a competitive product. Naraka is in a very, very similar spot, where the combos, the TODs, and many of the character designs, like Lee, they don't actually offer anything to the skill. They don't increase the skill expression. They don't make it more interesting or exciting, much less to watch, but they're just there because we have to have them. This obsession is one of the things that holds the game back, and the emphasis and the eyes being focused on this keeps important issues like all the mechanical problems that exist in the core fundamentals, like the locomotion, the mantling, and all the various collision problems. These are things that need to be addressed to make the core interactions more consistent and fucking sane to begin with. Instead, we look at all these TODs and 5,000 damage combos, and wowee, this is pretty stupid, and it should be addressed, but it doesn't get addressed. And the attachment to these unhealthy mindsets is one of the things that will always keep Naraka trapped in a very niche market, particularly in the West. The Chinese enjoy these technical things, but I believe that they can be done much more intelligently than they have been done in this game, without making it super frustrating to play for everyone else in the world. But what can I say? It's the second most popular game in China next to League of Legends, apparently. If 24 Entertainment has found success in this broken sham of a game, then perhaps there's nothing they need to change after all. We don't even comprise a tiny fraction of their market. But if they had ambitions to make Naraka a thing in the West, it doesn't start with marketing. And every single time a Westerner says that marketing is the reason why Naraka isn't successful in the West, I have to laugh. All it does is show that they've never actually played the game. Furthermore, I have nothing to attest to that says becoming skilled at the game truly makes it enjoyable. I have talked to quite a very large number of people now, and the only person I can truly say that seems to enjoy solos is Hypernova. All these other highly skilled players all express frustration with solos, but they play it because that's all they really have. They don't really want to play trios, they don't have partners for duos, or they don't enjoy Spiritual or other such things. But suffice to say, most of the people I've talked to, especially of a high level, do not enjoy solos. There's no guarantee whatsoever that if I somehow cracked the code to becoming confident, I would be any better. With all this in mind, I would like to ask a question. What is the point of these games? What is the point of Naraka? What is the point of the Battle Royale as a body? I often wonder this. What exactly does the Battle Royale offer you? Well, it offers you large-scale combat, at least in theory. You may not get that in Naraka very much, but that is the proposal. You get the only true open-world experience I've ever really seen in a video game, so you can kind of get that too, I suppose. But that's kind of really about it, right? Winning is nice, but at least when it comes to the West, you're not going to see much value in ranking. really doesn't matter what your rank is in the West. If you're in China, then sure, you might be able to pick up some prestige, maybe partnership offers or things like this if you're a high rank, because it actually means something. But beyond that, one has to wonder, what is the point? I never expected to become good. I wanted to become competent. I wanted to feel like I could at least play the game, right? I wanted to at least feel like that there was something to gain from me interacting. And I knew that that was going to be quite the ride. I knew that that was going to be difficult, and I knew it was going to take a long time. When I first started the game and I started talking to people about ping and stuff like that, pretty much everybody expressed concern about this ambition based on ping. Will you be able to actually obtain skill with this kind of a ping? No, that's what I was told. It's an upward climb at the best of times. But my ping is not very high, I said at the time. It's only around 100. Well, apparently 50 is considered unplayable in China. Meanwhile, we got a hardware upgrade and pulled things together and so on and so forth, and now I'm sitting around an average of 75-ish ping. Nothing really feels any different. I turned all my settings down to low. I tried all these BIOS optimizations, affinity things, and so on, most of which don't even apply to my processor to begin with. I've tried all the snake oil, and none of it has any effect whatsoever. A year and a half later, I'm sitting here looking at my experiences with this game and wondering, was it all really worth it? I certainly had fun at some points. I enjoyed the customs. You know, I enjoyed the duos, and the trios at times was entertaining as well. But every single time I get parry-robbed, every single time I get fucked over by the trades leading to other people getting priority, every single time I feel like I'm making progress but I can't actually actuate it because everything's so fucking inconsistent, I realize just how hopeless it is for me to move forward. I can't just go learn combos and try to improve my lethality because the combos don't fucking work for me. 211 requires immense good ping and high FPS to be remotely reliable, and Carousel is apparently just a shit show. Basic inputs like crouch canceling are just fucking bizarre and unusual to use. I've been trying for hours to be able to perform it consistently and I still can't. If nothing is consistent, then at what point do you find an avenue that you can apply the pressure to and grind on? At what point do you find a location that you can sit down and get to work on? It feels like I'm trapped in a misty nothingness with nowhere to go and no direction to start looking where to go. It's just completely aimless and hopeless. So it's time to let it go and move on. Well, no one can be particularly surprised about the ultimate conclusion of how my time in this game is going to go. It's time to quit. I am going to quit. Well, I've pretty much already quit. I mean, I quit before for a while. For some months, I stopped playing. And I'm going to quit again. I might play Spiritwell, should it ever come back and they get out of this evolution rotation or whatever it is they're doing. But I've played almost 100 matches of Immortal War across a handful of sessions. I got an average of 15 to 18 games of Immortal War every time I sat down to do it before the time I ran out. To me, there is no difference between Immortal War and normal ranked. It's the same players, it's the same experience. It's just the same. I don't even get into the loot because I don't get to interact with the map mechanics or anything like that in Immortal War, so I don't even really think about it. The only real difference is sometimes I have, better weapons, or sometimes my opponent has better weapons, but it all the experiences all average out the same in between ranked and Immortal War. There is no difference. Pretty much all the ranked matches are champion fight the moment you hit like platinum, gold, whatever. You get the odd lobby that isn't that way, but it's still going to be basically what happens is a lower ranked player ends up forming the lobby through the process of, orbital alignment, and then the high level players just get slurped into that instead. So there is basically no difference. I mean, you can even see it here. The single ranked game I had amidst all these Immortal War ones was a champion fight. And this one here was I got disconnected. And then, of course, if I get disconnected, the game crashes. And someone killed me during that. And since the game takes like 10 minutes to start up again, even though it's on an M2 and I have a very fast processor and tons of RAM, it doesn't really matter. It's Unity. Unity is garbage. My game literally loads 20-30 gigs of data within like 5 seconds. Unity really has no excuses for how bad at loading it is. Like, it's unfucking fathomable. My shit is not uncompressed. It's very well compressed. I don't know what Unity does to be as slow as it is, but it's really, really, really slow. And this game right here was Hypernova. So, no excuses there. It's just Hypernova. But I mean, let's be honest. That's all the games. I get the rare kill, but it's mostly circumstantial. Naraka is the most thoroughly unfun game I have played. And it's not necessarily unfun by design. I think you can enjoy it in the same manner you might enjoy any other fighting game that has touch of death combos in it. Like, for example, BlazBlue. But they're still very different kinds of games, because BlazBlue, even under really bad network conditions, is still a game you can interact with. But Naraka has a very, very, very high bar to meet in terms of geographic lottery and in terms of hardware before you can start interacting with it. And if you don't have both of those, you're not going to have a fun time. Every now and then, you can encounter players that, for whatever reason, they're on consoles, they're not living right next to the server, or maybe in the case like if Immortal, they are living right next to the server, but maybe they don't have 600, 800 FPS, and they're not animating, 30, 40% faster than you. And the odd person who's not running micro, maybe every now and then you can get an interaction, and, most often you're going to lose those interactions because you've spent 95, 99% of the game trying to play it, but being unable to interact with it. So you've never really learned anything, right? But you can still have a decent experience with those players losing. Losing is a part of the game. But most of the experiences are just thoroughly unpleasant. Thoroughly unpleasant. And you're fighting against the extremely poor development practices of 24 Entertainment, the extremely poor performance of their product, the fact that they just don't give a shit. I've played this game for over a year, and I haven't seen any improvement made to it since I started. I've seen it get worse. The performance has gotten worse, the stability has gotten worse, the heroes they've introduced have gotten worse, the weapons they've introduced have been more and more oppressive and toxic. I have not seen any marketed effort by this developer to actually improve the product objectively in any shape or fashion. They've made statements to some extent like, oh, we'd like to remove touch of death, but then they've turned around and allow flying knives and whipsword to lift you off the ground, and buff Tarka, rework Yodo and make her complete cancer, introduce Lee, and all this other shit. Actions do tend to speak louder than words. And this developer's actions have been, we want the game to be more about just combos. Except those combos aren't accessible to the vast majority of people outside of China, because we have servers that, depending on who you ask, have too low of a tick rates. They have, poor routing, poor performance, stuff like that. Whatever. And their gear up service does absolutely nothing for physical distance, period. And to make matters even worse, there are a lot of apologists out there and a lot of people who think they know something about computers and optimization, and they publish these guides that are all snake oil. There is a lot of snake oil in the few people within North America that are peddling these optimization things. I've gone through the whole motions with all of them, and none of them thus far have made the slightest bit of difference. What I have noticed is most of the optimization guides that people will give you, what they do is they make your computer generate more heat on idle, and that's it. Because people don't really understand how operating systems and software and stuff like that work. There is some really insane things I've heard about Windows 11 and some updates for Windows 10 and stuff like that, which, I mean, if you're using Windows 11, chances are you're used to dealing with Windows Update randomly turning off your internet, causing your computer to be stuck in boot loops and all this other shit. So you're kind of hopeless as it is. But, you know, I digress. This system is well optimized. It performs extremely well in just about everything I've got, except for Naraka. Naraka is just like Fallout 76. You know, FPS dictates your animation speed. In a world of complete insanity, the game would benefit from having something called a sanity check. Sanity checks are very basic stuff that a lot of developers do not integrate into their games because they're lazy or they're incompetent. I'm a firm believer that 24 Entertainment is both lazy and incompetent. They haven't shown any evidence to suggest otherwise thus far. Not just in terms of programmatic skill, but in terms of handling, you know, like public relations, communication, just sort of like basic shit. Right, like again, you know, a really basic example I like to go back to because it's fresh in everyone's mind is the Mr. Black collaboration where it airs at 2 to 3 a.m. because 2 to 3 a.m. is when the vast majority of the North American user base is awake. Oh, no, those are Chinese times, but they just forgot about time zones. They just, wow, people on the other side of the planet may be up at different periods of the day. No, that never crossed their mind whatsoever because they just care and think about us that much. Plain and simple. So when it goes into things that are actually important, that require actual effort to interact with, like the mantling system, the weapon collision, the way the skills and shit behaves, much less before you start getting into things like delta timers and all the other basic shit that you would have done when you were first building the game, or at least hired somebody to look at over the course of a weekend, because it's not fucking rocket science. You don't need to rebuild the entire game. You just need to take advantage of what you've already got, take a look at shit objectively, and spend some time to fix it. They don't use the profiling tools. They don't give a shit. And the end result is a lot of times you go into this game that's based on frame perfect shit all over the place, and 90% of it doesn't work. And when it does work, it feels like it's complete fucking random chance. It's going to be frustrating. And that's why the game has no retention in West. Because it is extremely frustrating. And 90% of what people think is hacks and cheats and all this other shit, no, it's just how the game works. That's just how fucking inconsistent it is. Unless you're in C or the AS server, where apparently the hacks are way more prominent, or you're playing in Rift, where there's lots of Tianhais flying around, we're not going to encounter a tremendous amount of hackers within the scope of Immortal War. Yeah, I've probably encountered a few of them and I don't realize it. You know, it's hard to tell, again, because in a world where there is no sanity, how well can you actually gauge that there's a lot of cheaters? Well, you know, running an X3D processor is basically de facto cheating. It isn't really cheating in the literal sense, but it is cheating in the objective sense because you're getting faster animations. What about an FPS cap? Well, that's like a band-aid to a shotgun wound. Yeah, you'll stop some of the leakage, but that's like, that's something that should have been done the instant they implemented it for tournaments. And then you fix the delta timers on top of it. So it's like a 1 to, you know, like a week of work tops. But they won't do that because Nobody cares in China, apparently. Even though China is also filled with hackers. And there's videos all over the place on Douyin of hackers. That it's getting more and more and more and more prominent because people are realizing, wait a second, this developer doesn't give a fuck. It's just like Blizzard. Blizzard doesn't give a fuck either. They've never given a fuck. The Chinese, man, the architectural gold farmer, they have always laughed at Blizzard. But Blizzard doesn't want to work too hard, just in the same sense that 24 Entertainment doesn't want to work too hard, because they still make the company money. So why would they work to ostracize their primary user base, right? But in the Western world, none of that even reaches their ears. In the Western world, I imagine that the vast majority of the 24 Entertainment developers don't even realize that there is a problem. That the Western world suffers so much playing this game that there are people playing with pings higher than 30 and 40. This is unthinkable in China. They're not even aware that other people in the rest of the world are even playing this game or even trying to play it. I mean, we certainly don't see any evidence that they're aware or that they care. And anytime I hear about, stories from Hypernova or whatever talking about how they interact with the EN-facing side of this company, it's just extreme wild incompetence left and right. Under the veil of this, I think it can be quite entertaining. I've certainly learned a lot playing this game, but man, it feels like I'm right back in like Epic 7 during its bleak months before I quit that. Is like so much of what I tried to do, it just has no fucking impact. And when I do win, it doesn't really feel like it's from any merit on my behalf. I would like to be able to play something more regularly that feels more rewarding and is more consistent. But I guess there really isn't any decent competitive products out there at this time. I guess that it would be best to funnel that drive into working on my own projects instead. And try to revitalize my own development work with what little time and energy I have left. But, like I said, I'll still sign in and I'll still, I'll try to do, a lot of my deaths in here are due to bots, hilariously. Just fucking bots, man. Fucking bots. Tessa still has my highest KD. That's crazy. Not too surprising, I guess. Since I'm not very good with Zenda, and I tried to play more safe with her, and I guess that means I get less third-party kills as a result. So, well, that's that. It's HKS quit, and Mucky has like soft quit. I would probably do duos or trios, but I don't got a good team. I definitely would need someone who has very strong legs and can carry, because I'm shit, and I'm running with a constant debuff to my mechanics. And then I can't really do that anymore because I've got all this other shit going on in real life now. So the ship has kind of already sailed for my availability in consistent group play anyway, which is very unfortunate, but that's how life is. Life is shit, and it just gets shittier and shittier and shittier, and then eventually you die, and only then can you finally rest.